It was a devastating blast. 14-year-old Stephen Bennett was killed instantly, his body horribly broken by the force of the explosion. Another boy of 11 was very seriously hurt. 2 other teenage boys were badly cut. The foot patrol, for whom the bomb was apparently intended, suffered 3 casualties, all soldiers, 2 of them seriously hurt. The police are now trying to establish how the bomb was triggered. Tonight, most of the residents were stunned and shocked. All of them are used to Republican terrorism. There's no doubt some openly support the terrorists, but tonight they were angry. Some shared the feeling of the Chief Superintendent for West Belfast, who told me the explosion could only be the work of madmen. Within 2 hours, the Provisional IRA had specifically denied any involvement. The smaller, more militant Irish National Liberation Army have so far said nothing.
James Robbins reporting there. And 5 British soldiers have been killed and 23 injured in a road accident in West Germany. The men, members of the Royal Artillery, were on training exercises at Barmholde near Saarbrücken. They'd been travelling in a lorry which overturned on a steep hill. There's to be a full-scale military inquiry. And here at home, 1 person was killed and 38 injured when a holiday coach collided with a lorry near Elgin in Morayshire today. Most of the injured were elderly people returning in the coach to their hotel at Lossiemouth. And some of the mystery surrounding the car crash in which Princess Grace of Monaco was killed may have been cleared up tonight. Local medical authorities said that before her car crashed, the former film star suffered a stroke, and they say her daughter, Princess Stephanie, tried to control the car by grabbing hold of the handbrake. Princess Stephanie is suffering from a cracked vertebrae, and tonight she's still suffering from shock. Meanwhile, in London, it's been announced that the Princess of Wales will represent the Queen at Princess Grace's funeral. Prince Charles will not be going with his wife. He has a previous engagement. The Princess of Wales met Princess Grace at a City of London charity evening last year. The funeral will be her first public engagement since her son was born 3 months ago. The condition of Rudolf Hess, the last of the top Nazis to be held in Spandau jail, is tonight said to be serious. Hess, who's been transferred from the prison to the British Military Hospital in Berlin, is suffering from pleurisy. And while there are fears that this could develop into pneumonia, doctors say that he is responding to treatment. Dr. Jan Józef Lipski, the Polish dissident interviewed here in London on Newsnight 2 nights ago, has been arrested by Polish authorities and accused of trying to overthrow the state. Dr. Lipski, a founder member of the dissident organisation CORE, was allowed to travel here for heart treatment last May. He returned to Poland yesterday knowing he faced a possibility of arrest because he believed he should stand by his friends who face similar charges. He and his colleagues, whose organisation inspired and supports the Solidarity movement, face a maximum penalty of death. Israeli forces have completed their lightning occupation of West Beirut after fierce battles with the left-wing Muslim militia. With unusual sharpness, a White House spokesman criticised the attack as unjustified and called on Israel to pull back, which drew an equally sharp refusal from Jerusalem tonight. From Beirut, this report by Chris Morris.
It was an extraordinary operation, a modern army advancing in the centre of a heavily populated city against small groups of fanatical gunmen. As the Israeli armour moved forward, tanks fired shells, hitting buildings in the Holiday Hotel district of the city. Some apartment blocks were set ablaze. Against the tanks and artillery, the left-wing militiamen stood little chance, but still they fought them in the streets, armed only with rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons. The hit-and-run tactics meant they constantly had to retreat, deeper into the city, relentlessly pursued by the Israeli soldiers. There were many casualties as the fighting raged on in residential and shopping areas. The militiamen of the biggest private army, the Morabitoun, had vowed to fight the Israelis to the death. But as their position became more and more hopeless, many fled, or simply fired their guns in the air as a protest against Israel's action.
Chris Morris reporting there. Well, finally, by way of cheer tonight, and heaven knows we need it, a story of crushed civil rights for which we thank the New York Times. Apparently, all NASA officials have, since 1969, been issued with a code outlining their powers to deal with any extraterrestrial beings landing in America. Now, far from being welcomed with open arms, our unfortunate little green friends would apparently be whisked away under armed guard to a period of indeterminate detention. This apparently is to protect the world from extraterrestrial contamination, whatever that may be. The stern gentlemen of NASA would allow only one break to the loneliness of unremitting incarceration. And that one break would be to allow our pining alien one phone call to anyone he wanted to. No bar, of course, on extraterrestrial conversation. Well, perhaps he could ring up his galactic friends and get them to come and rescue him. John?
This isn't April the 1st, is it?
I believe not, but one might believe so,
Well, the split between the left and right wings of the Scottish National Party has become a chasm this evening with the resignation from the party of Margot MacDonald, former MP, former senior vice chairman and one of its best known and most influential members. The split started with a disastrous performance of the party in the 1979 general election, when what became known as the 79 Group was formed, with Margot as a prominent member, to try to commit the party to a more left-wing programme. Although this group was small, it never numbered more than 200 or so members. It was very influential, and it caused much disruption among the more conventional bulk of the party. Matters came to a head at the party's annual conference in June this year, when the party finally ordered the group to disband.
I'm now convinced that the party will not recover its unity until all organised groups are banned. Those of us who put Scotland and the party above narrow personal or political obsessions cannot and will not tolerate behaviour which is divisive and harmful.
The 79 Group walked out of the conference and disbanded as an organisation within the SNP, but it's alleged that they then set up an ad hoc committee with a brief to organise a new group for left-wing nationalists from both within and outside the SNP. This new group was never formed because last Saturday, the SNP executive issued an ultimatum: resign from the committee by next Monday or be expelled from the SNP itself. Today, Margot MacDonald, back from holiday, resigned, not from the ad hoc committee, but from the SNP itself in protest at the letter that was waiting for her on her return.
When I returned, I find that a letter has been written to people who are presumed to be members of a committee, which is presumed to be plotting to set up an organisation which is presumed to be at variance with the SNP's constitution. And I find it utterly offensive that I should have in a letter written to me by the chairman of the SNP that I have been devious in supporting such a device to try and fool the party in the conference. I did no such thing, neither did any of my colleagues, and so therefore I'm resigning. I'm very angry that the constitution of the party should be abused in this way.
Jim Sillars, Vice Chairman of SNP and also Margot MacDonald's husband. What do you feel this evening? Are you upset about what your wife has done?
No, it makes for a very interesting domestic life.
Have you had a chance to speak to her?
Well, Margot's circumstance, of course, is that she's a broadcaster working in independent radio, and she cannot therefore get involved in normal political debate and controversy.
Well, she's there now, isn't she?
No, she's not, because after this I don't see any reason for her to be involved in it whatsoever. I mean, we returned from holiday to find her at the centre of a political storm which she had nothing to do in creating.
Do you think she's done the right thing, though?
I don't think Margot had any alternative, given that she's a broadcaster with independent radio, and they are governed through the guidelines of the IBA and the Act that organises the independent sector of the media.
But of course, she wasn't just protesting at that. She was actually protesting at the way the SNP had behaved towards anybody, not just to herself in her rather special position.
I think that was Margot's final word in the matter. In fact, it's her first word in the matter, because she's withstood a great deal of abuse in public without the ability to reply because of her broadcasting position. And I think she should be given the licence for one final statement, because after all, and I think many people would agree, and the fact that I'm her husband, I don't think means that I'm totally biased in the matter. I think most people would agree that she was a brilliant political leader of the Scottish National Party between 1974 and 1979, and she is one of the best political minds in Scotland, and that she gave a great deal of time and energy, quite selflessly, to the Scottish National Party. It's extremely sad that she received a letter of the kind she did once we had returned from France.
Now, I gather that you, whether it's the ad hoc committee or the 79 Group, have been meeting this evening to decide what to do. Is the group going to resign, or are you going to wait to be kicked out?
No, what myself and Andrew Curry, and he's the chap who was leading the walkout in the film clip from Air, what we're trying to do is stitch the party together to prevent it, in fact, tearing itself apart. And it was very interesting to note that you quoted the chairman's speech, because I'd like to quote the speech the chairman intended to make but didn't make. He issued to the press on the Thursday evening his chairman's speech for the Friday morning. And this is what he was going to say. It is no secret that we had internal problems from 1979 to 1981, which have lowered our credibility. Now that most of our internal problems are over, we can concentrate on improving our public standing and our image.
Why didn't he deliver that speech then?
Because he was bounced into a panic-stricken move by Mrs. Winnie Ewing and several colleagues of hers. In fact, she in fact went on the record in BBC television boasting that she had plotted the whole thing and she was 101% successful. So the role of the chairman over the next 72 hours inside the Scottish National Party is a crucial one.
What happens, though, if this split does take place? I mean, is it your view, and presumably your wife's as well, I'm not asking you to speak for her, far from it, that the SNP will be fatally damaged if it loses its left wing?
I don't think there's any question about that. Scotland is a much more radical country than England. I mean, that just happens to be a historical fact of life for a whole variety of reasons. And if anyone is going to make progress towards Scottish self-government, it can only be done by winning the confidence of people who currently vote Labour. And what we in the left of the SNP have been trying to do over the last 2 or 3 years is create a new coalition for political progress.
But you're in danger of being prevented from doing that. Is that your fear this evening?
Well, we may be in danger in terms of prevention, but what we will continue to try and do over the next 72 hours is persuade important people like the chairman that it's time to exercise a fair degree of tolerance, because we're guilty of one crime only, and that is trying to forge this new progressive coalition between the people who currently vote SNP, between the working class people in Scotland who currently vote Labour, but are frustrated by the English constantly voting Tory, and by the progressive elements of the middle class who have a deep social conscience and are concerned about the condition of Scotland. That is the left-wing strategy.
Jim Sillis, thank you very much for outlining the moment of crisis in the Scottish National Party. And a very quick look at the papers, which have just landed here. Right, Financial Times. Health service unions reject government bid to end dispute. They also record the fact that US is denouncing Israeli move into West Beirut. Times notes, and didn't we see it earlier, Fowler anger as health unions reject new offer. Another copy of the Times, don't need that. Bond set for final breakup. The Daily Telegraph suggesting that Chancellor Schmidt is going to break up the Social Democrat Liberal coalition tomorrow. What have we got in the tabloids? The Daily Express refers to that story about Princess Grace having a stroke at the wheel. That's about all from part one of the programme. Don't, of course, forget that full coverage of the result of today's Gower by-election is going to be available in Newsnight Part 2. That's introduced by David Dimbleby. David, what have you got for us?
I should think it'll be at about, well, we'll be on the air just before midnight, and somewhere between midnight and 1 o'clock we should have the result. This is the first test of the major parties since the last by-election, which was in June. It's the 15th by-election of this government. It's the first in Wales for 10 years or more. And once again, everybody's going to be watching not so much, perhaps, to see in this safe Labour seat who actually wins, but looking at the proportional votes they get. Votes, after all, are far more interesting than opinion polls. And in view of what they were saying about the SNP, it'll be curious to see how Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, does. It's fighting its first election with the word socialist written into its constitution. Anyway, we'll be here. Peter Snell will be on the computer. Professor Anthony King will be discussing the implications. Sir Robin Day will be here with Neil Kinnock, Bill Rogers, Patrick Jenkin, and David Wigley. And Ian Smith is even now down at the count in the Gower constituency. Ian.
Well, we have most of the ballot boxes here now, but some of them are still coming in. The acting returning officer says that they must be coming in by pony and trap, so the final result may not be known until a little bit after 1 o'clock. Prediction? Well, of course, everybody expects the Labour man to get in, but Tories and the SDP may be neck and neck. Now back to John Tusa.
Sounds worth waiting up for. Fascinating evening. For the moment, from us, good night from Newsnight.
Tomorrow at 12 noon on BBC One, there'll be a News Afternoon special extended to see the return of HMS Invincible from the South Atlantic to Portsmouth. That's at 12 noon on BBC One. And on to we go fishing, and they didn't all get away. And on to it's back to the Newsnight studio for by-election special.
Good evening. Within the next hour or so, we hope to have the result of today's by-election in the Gower constituency in Wales, by-election caused by the death of the Labour member, Dr. Ivor Davies, who'd held this safe Labour seat since 1959. Tonight doesn't promise any dramatic upsets. It looks pretty certain that Labour will hold the seat. But elections are more convincing evidence, perhaps, than opinion polls of the mood of the electorate. For that reason, Labour's going to be keen to show it can hold on to its share of the vote there, over 50% at the general election. And the real battle, though, perhaps is between the Conservatives and the SDP Liberal Alliance, both of whom are extremely anxious to come a good second. The SDP saying it would be awkward for them to come third. And Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists' enthusiastic candidate, has been saying he hopes to win. I suspect if what the other parties think of his chances are anything to go by, he'll be quite happy if he saves his deposit. Anyway, we'll have the result round about 1 o'clock, perhaps a bit later than that, we don't know yet. Peter Snow, when it comes, will be here at the computer keyboard, analysing it. And Anthony King, Professor of Government at the University of Essex, will be commenting on the result.
And with me for Frank and Phyllis' comment, both before and after the declaration of the result, are the Tory Cabinet Minister, the Right Honourable Patrick Jenkin MP, the Industry Secretary, Labour Shadow Cabinet Member Mr Neil Kinnock MP, who is also a member of Labour's National Executive Committee, the Social Democrat Bill Rogers MP, a former Labour Cabinet Minister. He's now fighting for the SDP presidency against his colleague Shirley Williams. In this programme, Mr Rogers speaks for the SDP Liberal Alliance, whose candidate in Gower is an SDP man. And the President of Plaid Cymru, David Wigley MP, Welsh nationalist. Now, we look forward to hearing their explanations and speculations, not, of course, their prevarications, a little later in the programme.
Well, those with a vested interest will be talking later on to Robin. The constituency of Gower is a curious one. It's a large Welsh-speaking population, I think the 8th most Welsh-speaking of the Welsh constituencies. But at the southern end, the Gower Peninsula, it has a large area, English-speaking, mainly middle-class, retired people, beaches and the rest of it. And in the centre, industrial areas, and to the north, mining and farming. So it's a very complicated and large constituency. And I think perhaps we ought to start at this point just by looking at what happened there in the election of '79.
One of the safer of Wales's very safe Labour seats, this one is. And it's tucked down there in the southwest of Wales, in West Glamorgan. And here's the background, the base on which the parties have to fight this contest today. There it is, May 79, there's the result, with Labour's majority at 10,641. Now, that is well down on the majorities they were getting in the 50s and 60s. They were up there in the 20,000s. And there's Ivor Davies's vote, 25,000, the MP who died this summer. And the Conservatives doing pretty well in 1979, with 14,000 odd votes. But the one we're watching, of course, is the Liberal base of 4,000 odd votes, on which the Alliance hopes to build up enough votes, at least, perhaps, to catch the Conservatives, and some of them are talking, perhaps a bit optimistically, about getting within reach of the Labour candidate here, who's fighting from that very powerful position there. Now, the Plaid Cymru vote of 3,300, they haven't done too well in this seat before. 6,000 was the best they did, nearly 6,000 back in 1970, so we're not expecting too much of Plaid Cymru. It's really a fight between those first three parties. Turnout, 81%, usually pretty high. The Welsh tend to turn out in great numbers at general elections. We're going to have to see what they do here at the by-election. Now, there's the mountain that the other parties have to climb, that 53% share that Labour made in 1979. The Tories were well behind them with 30%. Even that was up from 20% in the 74 election, so the Tories came within 23% of Labour there, but that was doing pretty well. It's a safe Labour seat. There, the Liberals on 9%. It's one of the lowest bases from which the Alliance has had to fight to try and move up and catch the Tories and the Labour Party here. 9% they scored in '79. And there is Plaid Cymru on 7%. Now, the way the polls have been going during the campaign has been really not particularly exciting, quite frankly. it's shown a very strong Labour lead at the beginning of the campaign. The Conservatives there, well behind on sort of 27, 28%. This is the first poll of the campaign, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. STP Liberal Alliance starting quite perhaps hopefully there on about 18% 3 or 4 weeks ago, and Plaid Cymru on 5%. Now, the second poll of the campaign, 10 days later, showed absolutely no change. Really, the parties seeming to have no effect at all on changing the tempo of the campaign, on changing the relative strengths and party supports in this constituency. With Labour there, with that commanding lead, remaining steady, the Conservatives, the SDP Liberal Alliance, Plaid Cymru moving slightly ahead. But interestingly enough, at the very end of the campaign, a slight twist in the tail of it. There you see Labour maintaining that commanding lead, the Conservatives, though, dropping off about 4% at the very end of the campaign. This is in this morning, the Murray poll in this morning's papers. And there is the SDP Liberal Alliance just edging up there at the very end of the campaign, and Plaid Cymru too, moving forward 1% to about 8%. So there has obviously been a bit of a twist in the tail. Whether it's enough to make the difference for the Alliance and give them second place, we have to see.
There was a great insistence by the Labour Party that they had to get the vote out. As always, of course, the Labour vote, if there is a low turnout, is the one that tends to suffer. And I was there yesterday in the constituency. They were making great efforts to get everybody out. The Tories, on the other hand, were saying that they hoped there'd be a cloudburst from the opening of polls until the close of polls. I think, in fact,